Today's episode of Transformers Prime is interesting because a lot happens and yet not a lot happens. These last few episodes have been pretty serialized in general, so while the plot does advance, things don't really come to any sort of conclusion. And this episode, it feels like that too. And yet at the same time, things progress a lot. The status quo shifts a lot, several times. It's a lot of fun. It's a really fun ride. Though something that happens at the end of the episode is telegraphed pretty hard by the fact that the kids are brought back into the story suddenly, even though they haven't been a part of it for a little while as all this late game relic retrieval mission stuff has been going on. Things pick up pretty much where they left off. The Autobots are well aware that Starscream may have taken the Omega Keys to Megatron to try to buy back Megatron's favor, and they're fully aware of the ramifications of that possibility. But Optimus has an ace up his sleeve. He knows what the keys are used for, the Omega Lock. Megatron doesn't. And for whatever reason, Optimus didn't tell the others about the Omega Lock. Smokescreen postulates that maybe it's because he was worried that the information would get out if more people knew, or that Alpha Trion would rather, since it was Alpha Trion who apparently told him in that message that Optimus got not to tell anyone about the Omega Lock, which we didn't get to see, I don't think. If we did, I don't remember it. Like that specific bit of dialogue. I don't think we saw that specific bit of dialogue that he's referencing, which is a little weird. But they do at least have this little bit of information, which gives them a little bit of an edge. Before Megatron can do anything, he'll have to work out how exactly the keys are used. But that's not much, and that's why it's a good thing that Dreadwing, after what happened in the previous episode, decides he can't follow Megatron anymore, which, while he still doesn't believe in the Autobot ideals, and therefore won't join the Autobots, it does mean that he's willing to help them undermine his former leader. He can't get to the keys himself, but he is able to get another relic, the Forge of Solus Prime. He gives it to Optimus, who can, of course, use it. And while Optimus lacks the skill with the hammer to create new relics from scratch, therefore he can't create his own Omega Keys, he can upgrade and restore things. And considering that the keys are needed to restore Cybertron, obviously the lock itself is on Cybertron, so he uses the Forge to upgrade their ground bridge into a full-blown space bridge. And now they can go to Cybertron freely. It's so cool, though. The pace of this episode is so great, because all of this happens, and it all just feels like natural progressions of stuff from the previous episode and or episodes, right? Like, I've complained about the logic of this show some in the past, right? Obviously, I have some critiques of how these characters logic their way through situations, and more grossly, because that could just be character stuff, but more grossly, how the show logics through its plots. But here, everything just works so well, and the pacing feels so satisfying. And so it feels, again, so satisfying when, as all of this is happening, while having a slap fight, Starscream and Knockout accidentally figure out how to use the keys to find the lock. They're both a little, let's say, anxious, because Dreadwing, after giving the Forge to Optimus, tried to assassinate Starscream. And Megatron, in his infinite wisdom, and I say that very sarcastically, chooses to kill Dreadwing instead of just letting him kill Starscream. It's not the choice I would have made, frankly, because it's freaking Starscream, man. He's gonna try to backstab you again eventually. It's just what he does. But they're a little anxious to get the keys working. Starscream's not really helping much. They get slap fighty. It's a slap fight. Like, they're slapping each other with the keys, but it's a slap fight. It's funny. It's a funny scene. There's actually a couple of really funny scenes with the Decepticons in this episode. One of them being the one where Starscream almost died, which was funny in and of itself, but also Starscream, when he's scared, is a funny character, so I'm sure you can imagine. But so they know where the Omega Lock is now, too, and they have their space bridge. So they activate their space bridge, just as the Autobots are using their space bridge, and the two space bridges are able to detect each other. But the Decepticons don't think the Autobots could possibly have a space bridge. So they don't think to monitor for that kind of thing, right? So now the Autobots have a massive advantage. Optimus declares they need to stop Megatron no matter the cost, so they roll out to Cybertron with all of the relics that they've collected up to this point. And it's glorious. Finally, they make use of these things. And while I have criticized them for not using them prior to this, at the very least, when the time comes for them to really step up and really make the most of what they've got, they do. And that's pretty darn cool. Like, they even use the spark extractor, basically nuking Megatron's entire force. And on top of that, I mentioned that Optimus is skilled enough with the Forge to restore things. He has, of course, reforged the Starsaber as well. And while it's not really explained why it doesn't break when it clashes with the Dark Starsaber anymore, I'm going to assume it's because it's been forged like new. It's not an ancient relic anymore that's a little worn out. It's basically a new weapon and is therefore as durable as this other new weapon. And in the ensuing battle, they manage to get the keys away from Megatron. They drive off to the location of the Omega-Lock, and the entire site, appropriately enough, transforms into this big planet restorer doohickey. I don't know if this thing has a name. Is this whole thing just the lock? I don't actually know, and I don't care. So, like, what does it matter what it's called, right? It looks pretty stinking cool, though, and the sequence of it transforming is really badass. But just when victory seems to be within the Autobots' grasp, just when it seems like they're going to beat Megatron to this and have their foot in the door of making things right in this new restored version of their world, everything gets thrown through a loop. Because in their haste to do all of this, the Autobots, of course, neglected to watch after the kids. Because there's no one back there to watch after the kids. Ratchet's monitoring the mission, and they're all on Cybertron. So, the episode ends with and this was Starscream and Soundwave's idea, but Starscream's idea, because he's the second in command again now, so he's in charge while Megatron's away. Starscream comes through with the kids in some sort of life support pod things that he intends to open and expose them to the toxic atmosphere of Cybertron if the Autobots don't allow Megatron to restore the planet and become the person who restored the planet. Something that he can leverage against the Autobots politically. Like, it's not the end of the world if that happens, right? But it's definitely something you don't want to have happen. And this is also the Decepticons. They're going to try to leverage the lives of the kids for as much as they can, right? So, like, what do you do in this situation? We don't know yet because the episode ends right there. It's fantastic. It's such a good episode. Like, on one hand, again, the pacing of this one's just so perfect. And the fight where we have all 5 Autobots that aren't Ratchet, each using a relic and each using it to the best of their ability, to the apex of that relic's capabilities, was great. I am a little appalled at the use of a weapon of mass destruction against the army of Viacons when they weren't much of a threat. Like, you got Smokescreen with the phase shifter thing, or what it was called, Lemillioning himself through the ground everywhere and basically just appearing wherever he wants. So why didn't he, like, use that specifically on Megatron instead of using it all on Megatron's mostly harmless guys? I don't get it. Because this is a show that constantly these characters refuse to double tap any named enemy that's been knocked down. But in the episode where Optimus is like, "Oh, we have to stop him at all cost," and they have the opportunity to stop him. He's surprised by the loss of the keys. He's just been hit by the Starsaber. You could have gotten him right there. It would have just been done. And they don't. They focus on all the mooks instead. It's a little disappointing. It's a disappointing moment in an otherwise fantastic episode. That's like, yeah, maybe using the spark extractor in general wasn't a bad idea, but that's like the one use of a relic that I feel could have been handled better. The rest of it was fantastic, though. Seeing the agile and expert fighter RC using the Apex armor, isn't that what it's called? And just walking through hordes of baddies was fantastic. And Smokescreen is really stinking good with that phase shifter thing. Like, he's just great with it. And, like, it comes down to the fact that when they were putting this episode together, clearly somebody envisioned some really cool ways for that thing to be used. And I appreciate that a lot. But, like, on top of all of that other good stuff, that good pacing stuff, that good action stuff, the animation, of course, is pretty stinking spectacular, because this is a really good-looking show. Bringing the kids back into the show at this point, just to have them used against the Autobots, to kind of show that things have escalated to the point that this isn't really a show that can afford to have human kids as viewpoint characters anymore, was, I think, pretty smart. Because while I do kind of prefer that kind of Transformers show over the over-serious kind, the situation in this show has escalated. That's a really great way of showing us that very definitively. On the other hand, though, there's only 4 keys, and even assuming that you have to plug the 4 keys in at the same time to use the lock, you only need 4 guys, and they all had relics. And, like, for example, Bumblebee had the one that, like, lets you, like, telekinesis stuff, right? And Bulkhead had the one that lets you stun people. Can't remember what they're called. It just fell out of my head. But, like, those are both cool and everything. Feel like maybe you could have made do with only one or the other of those. Or, because you really only need one hand for either of them, you could have given both of them to either Bumblebee or Bulkhead and had somebody stay behind to watch the kids. So this is kind of on the Autobots. It's kind of their fault, frankly. So, again, here's a plan that I feel like I would have executed differently. But at the same time, I understand why they didn't do that. I understand why they were concerned enough to rush into the situation without perhaps thinking it through as completely as they could have. This is the fate of their planet we're talking about. I understand they're going to make some mistakes because that's something that's going to be weighing on them. It's going to be dragging them down. Right? All in all, though, this is a really good episode. I've said that a couple of times now, and I mean it. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I really, really like this one. And I'm super hyped to get to the next one. I might actually watch the next one later today and get the footage for that review shot well ahead of time, because I'm that anxious to continue watching this show after watching this. As per usual, though, guys, if you have seen this episode of Transformers Prime, what did you think of it? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below. And while you're down there, you might as well like the video, share it with anyone else you think would enjoy my content, subscribe if you haven't. You also check out links to my various social medias, as well as the many ways you can help out the channel. Those will be in the video description, but either way, this has been AJ22, and I will talk to you guys later.